The moon hung low over the Texas frontier, casting a silver glow across the ancient oak trees that had seen more years than any living soul for 100 miles. The night air felt cool, maybe 60 degrees, but the chill wasn't what sent a shiver through the darkness. Beneath a massive oak, a Comanche warrior named Tahoma dangled several feet above the ground, tied by thick ropes that cut deep into his wrists. His feet barely reached the dusty earth, his weight pulling hard against his bindings every time he struggled to breathe. Tahoma was a man carved by the land, a survivor of scorching summers that could fry an egg on a rock and winters that blew down from the north like a knife of ice. He had ridden across the plains for decades, maybe competing with the buffalo for who knew the land better. At 36 years old, he had already lived through more battles than most men ever would. But tonight, the war was inside his own body. His chest burned from a deep slash that bled slowly, darkening his buckskin shirt. Every heartbeat felt heavier than the last, like the ticking of a clock running out. Above him, only a yard or so from his head, a rattlesnake coiled itself across the branch. The diamond-shaped pattern on its back glimmered under the moonlight. Its rattle shook a quiet but unmistakable warning. At his age, Tahoma knew what that meant. He wasn't just being left for dead. He was being offered to the wild as a slow, cruel sacrifice. Whoever had tied him here wanted nature to finish the job. Tahoma wasn't afraid of dying. Most men his age had already thought about what lay beyond the stars, but what gnawed at him was the idea of dying alone, far from his people, without a final prayer or a familiar voice to send him onward. He tilted his head back just enough to look at the sky. The stars seemed endless, and in a land so wide, a man could feel smaller than a pebble kicked along a dusty road. His breathing turned shallow. His shoulders trembled. He wondered if sunrise, still at least 6 hours away, would ever come for him. Maybe the coyotes would arrive before then. Maybe the snake would decide he had lingered long enough. Tahoma pressed his forehead to the rough bark of the tree. If these were his last moments, he intended to face them with dignity. But still, a single thought flickered in his mind like a dying candle. Someone, anyone, please let this end fast. Little did he know, footsteps would soon disturb the silence. And fate, like the frontier, still had a few surprises waiting in the dark. A breeze whispered through the oak branches, carrying with it the sharp scent of dust and mesquite. The rattlesnake above Tahoma kept its gaze locked on him, its tail buzzing a cold warning. It seemed the night had chosen sides, and nature was preparing to finish what cruel men had started. Tahoma closed his eyes again, just for a moment, trying to keep the dizziness from overtaking him. He could feel the blood dripping from his chest wound, each drop falling about 3 feet to the dry Texas soil below. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours. That's when he heard the crunch of small footsteps, careful but not skilled at hiding. Whoever approached was lightweight, maybe 60 or 70 pounds at most, and was trying very hard to stay quiet. A child? Out here? Nearly 10 miles from the nearest settlement? Impossible, or so Tahoma thought. Out of the shadows stepped a tiny figure, not even 5 feet tall. The moonlight revealed a girl, maybe 10 years old, wearing an oversized cowboy hat that drooped over her brow. Her little boots, at least 2 sizes too big, scuffed the ground with each uncertain step. A black and white checkered dress hung down to her knees, now dusty and torn, and over it she wore a brown vest that seemed like it once belonged to a grown man. Her breathing was ragged, like someone who had run far and fast before forcing herself to slow down. When she reached about a yard from the oak tree, she froze. The rattlesnake, only a foot above Tahoma's head, lifted its rattle higher. The hiss sliced through the silence like a sharpened knife. The girl swallowed hard. Tahoma could hear it. Then she pulled something from the pocket of her vest, a small knife, maybe 6 inches long. The blade, though chipped and worn, still caught the moonlight. Tahoma mustered what voice he had left. "Go," he rasped, barely louder than the breeze. "Run. This place isn't for children." The girl shook her head. "No," she whispered, voice trembling. I have to do this." Her name, he did not know it yet, was Clara Dawson. And at 10 years old, she was standing in the loneliest, darkest part of the Texas frontier, choosing a path few grown men would dare walk. She placed her foot against the oak trunk and began to climb. Every move was shaky, the bark biting into her soft hands. The branch she needed to reach lay about 8 feet above the ground, an intimidating height for a child. Twice she slipped, sliding down a foot or two before catching herself. Still, she pressed on. Tahoma could only watch, helpless and stunned. He had lived long enough to know true courage, and this was it, raw and unpolished. When Sarah got close to the branch, the rattlesnake reacted first. Its rattle became a violent, buzzing alarm. The snake's head rose, ready to strike, its fangs catching the silver glint of night. Her breath hitched, her body frozen in place. Tahoma wanted to shout, wanted to shield her, but his body refused to respond. Then Sarah did something that would stay burned in Tahoma's memory forever. She steadied her hand and kept climbing. Her knife dug into the rope around his wrist. Each fiber that snapped sounded like a firecracker in her ears. The snake lunged, missing her cheek by an inch. She nearly slipped, her boot dangling in the air. But she held tight, tears welling but never falling. "Hold on," she murmured to him, to herself, to the night. At last, the first rope gave way. Tahoma's left arm dropped, his weight shifting suddenly. The entire tree groaned. Sarah yelped softly as the movement nearly pulled her from the branch, but she clung tighter, gripping the bark with the determination of someone who refused to watch another life be lost. The snake recoiled, preparing for another strike. Sarah switched hands quickly and began sawing the last rope. Her small fingers slipped twice on the blood-soaked knot, her palms stained red, not her own blood, but his. Finally, snap. Gravity claimed Tahoma, and he crashed down the remaining 3 feet to the dirt. The snake, startled, slid away into the shadows. Sarah scraped her way down the tree trunk, landing beside him. She pressed her small, shaking hand against his shoulder. "You're alive," she breathed out, relief flooding her voice. But the moment lasted only seconds. From somewhere in the dark woods came a voice, young, sharp, and dripping with cruelty. "Good job, Sarah. But did you really think we'd let him go?" The night shifted again, because saving a life was only the beginning, and danger had followed her here. Clara Dawson's heart pounded like a church bell struck too hard as she crouched beside Tahoma on the forest floor. His breathing was weak, but steady enough to know he was still fighting. She wished she had time to help him sit up, maybe give him water, anything a child would offer someone in pain, but that young voice from the shadows forced her to freeze. The boy who stepped into the moonlight looked barely 15, tall and lanky, boots dusty from hours of riding. His name was Vince Malone. His hair stuck out from under his father's old hat, and his right hand still bore a fresh bandage where Sarah's knife had slashed him earlier. His eyes, however, were the most chilling part, too cold, too hateful for someone not yet grown. Eli kicked dirt at Tahoma's legs. "You should have died quietly, Comanche," he sneered. Then he glared at Sarah. "You were supposed to lead him right to us. That's what Pa ordered." Sarah's breath shook. She didn't want to shake. Brave people didn't shake, but fear cares little about bravery. She clutched the 6-inch bone-handled dagger Tahoma had given her, though her fingers barely circled the handle. She wasn't sure if she could use it, but she knew she would if she must. Eli raised his knife. Something fierce inside Sarah snapped. She leapt forward, swinging the dagger not at him, but at his hand. The blade sliced his palm again. Eli yelped, dropping his weapon into the weeds. That scream gave Sarah all the courage she needed. She grabbed Tahoma's arm, tugging him as hard as her 70-pound frame allowed. "Get up," she demanded through gritted teeth. Tahoma grunted, pushing off the ground. His legs wobbled beneath him like fence posts caught in a heavy storm, but he stayed upright. Pain could slow him, not stop him. Sarah looked back once. Eli's face was red with rage, twisting into something nearly demonic. "You'll pay for that," he shouted, gripping his bleeding hand. Then the sound came sharp, echoing a whistle from the hills. That whistle had a message: don't let them escape. Sarah dragged Tahoma between the trees, her boots slipping on roots and fallen leaves. The smell of cedar and dust filled her lungs as they slipped deeper into the thick brush. A distant wolf howled, or maybe that was just the wind, but either way, the night felt alive with danger. Behind them rose the unmistakable sound of dogs, maybe 4 or 5 hounds, their howls bouncing between the trees. Lanterns flickered in the distance, each one marking a rider closing the mile-wide gap between them. Tahoma's voice was barely a whisper. "Toward the creek. 200 yards. Masks are sent. Sarah nodded, breathless, and helped him stumble forward. The ground sloped downward, loose dirt sliding under their feet. Branches clawed at Sarah's arms like hands begging her to stop, turn back, surrender. She kept going. The sound of the rushing creek grew louder. The water would be colder than an early December morning, but cold was better than dead. Sarah stepped into the creek, first water up to her shins, a gasp forcing its way from her lips. She gripped Tahoma's forearm, pulling him in. The icy current grabbed their legs, making every step a fight. They waded downstream about 30 yards, their tracks disappearing beneath the flowing water. Sarah's teeth chattered from the chill, but she whispered to Tahoma, "We'll make it." He looked at her with something that resembled pride. The hounds bayed again close, maybe less than 50 yards away now. Tahoma pointed across the creek to a cluster of willow trees drooping low like old men leaning on canes. "There, cover." And they crouched behind the branches, hidden beneath their curtain-like sweep. Sarah held her breath. Lantern light flickered across the opposite bank, long shadows cast by riders searching, sniffing, snarling with anger. Eli's voice echoed through the darkness. "Find them. Pa wants that Comanche scalp by sunrise and the girl alive just long enough to learn her place." Sarah's stomach twisted. Her aunt held hostage back in Redstone flashed through her mind. The threat, the manipulation, and now the cost of saying no. Tahoma leaned closer. "You chose the hard road, little one." She nodded. "Sometimes the right one's the hardest." For a moment, even in hiding, Tahoma smiled. The searchers moved farther upstream, fooled by the cold current. When the last lantern faded behind a grove of cottonwoods, Tahoma tapped Sarah's shoulder. "Time to move." They left the water, climbing a short embankment as quietly as two living souls could. Just a few yards ahead, a worn trail cut through the brush wagon tracks, maybe a few months old, leading toward the open plains. That was when Sarah heard something else, hoofbeats, more controlled, more cautious. Not the rush charge of hunters, but someone approaching alone. Moonlight shaped a silhouette, a man in a long duster coat, rifle slung low, riding a bay horse about 15 hands tall. He looked rugged, older, maybe late 40s, a face carved by wind and Sunday. Sarah gasped. "Uncle Will?" The man stiffened, turning sharply toward her voice. Recognition hit him like a bolt of lightning. "Sarah, Lord above girl, what trouble have you gotten yourself into?" He dismounted in a heartbeat, boots landing firmly on dry ground. His eyes darted from Sarah to Tahoma, suspicion thick as the dust in the air. "What's a Comanche doing with my niece?" Sarah stepped in front of Tahoma, her voice fierce despite her exhaustion. "He's not the enemy, but Hank Malone is." Uncle Will's jaw tightened. Somewhere behind them, carried by the night wind, the hounds howled again. Closer. Will looked at Tahoma, then at Sarah, and without a word, he extended his hand. "Let's ride, before the devil himself finds us." The night sky stretched endlessly over the Texas frontier, a velvet canvas scattered with stars brighter than the lanterns of any town. Clara Dawson sat in the saddle ahead of her uncle, Samuel Dawson, her small frame pressed close to the warm leather as the horse pushed through the brush at a steady trot about 6 miles per hour. Tahoma, weakened but unyielding, rode a few feet behind on a Mustang as sturdy as the land itself. The air rested cool against their faces, maybe 45 degrees, cold enough to bite but not bitter enough to freeze hope. Even so, Sarah couldn't stop shivering. It wasn't the cold, it was the memory of what they had just survived. The dogs, the gunshots, Eli's cruel voice promising her punishment. Will tightened his hold around her shoulders, noticing the tremors. "You're safe for the moment," he said softly. "But we have to keep moving. Malone won't quit." "Not tonight." Sarah nodded, though fear clung to her like dew on prairie grass. Tahoma breathed heavily, blood dampening his bandages again. Will glanced back. "That wound's looking bad," he muttered. Tahoma's reply was quiet but strong, carried by the dignity of a man who'd walked the earth long before fences claimed the land. "I've seen worse," he said. Will studied him. In another life or even another year, he might have drawn his rifle first and asked questions never. But tonight, a half-dead Comanche had risked everything to protect his niece. That earned respect and trust. "We'll stop at Clearwater Springs," Will said. Old Ruth Thompson lives about 2 miles from here. She'll help if she can." The promise of shelter of warmth made Sarah close her eyes with relief. They traveled for nearly 30 minutes, the Mustang's hooves crunching over dry ground, jackrabbits darting from their path. The closer they got to the valley, the more gentle the land felt. The trees thinned, grass grew thicker, and soon, the silhouette of a small homestead rose from the moonlit plain, a weather-worn cabin with a porch that leaned a few inches off-center, like an old farmer resting on one leg. A faint glow flickered inside the soft light of a kerosene lamp. Will dismounted first, lifting Sarah down carefully. She had mud on her knees, leaves tangled in her hair, and a smear of dried blood across her cheek, but her eyes burned bright, like a match refusing to go out. He knocked on the door 3 steady raps. Moments later, a woman in her late 50s appeared, wrapped in a faded shawl. Ruth Thompson, thin, tough as boot leather, and sharp-eyed as a hawk. "Samuel Dawson?" she asked, eyebrows raised. "You best have a good reason for knocking past midnight." "We do," Will answered. "Trouble's behind us. Big trouble." Mary stepped outside, her boots scraping the porch boards. Her gaze landed on Tahoma, then on Sarah, bruised, cold, but undefeated. "Oh, Lord," she whispered. Sarah lowered her head in respect. "Ma'am, we need help." Mary hesitated for only half a second. Kindness was a reflex for her, and dangerous as that could be, it was also who she was. "Bring him inside," she said, swinging the door wide. "And close that door quick. Heat don't grow on trees." Inside, the house smelled of wood smoke and fresh cornbread. A pot hung above the fireplace, steam rising from its lid. Sarah practically melted into the warmth while Mary guided Tahoma to a wooden table. She rummaged through drawers, pulling out bandages and a bottle of clear liquid whiskey, the frontier cure for just about everything. "This is gonna sting," she warned. Tahoma nodded, a warrior accepting pain like a veteran accepts memory. As Mary cleaned the gash across his chest about 8 inches long, angry and deep, Will paced beside the door, hand resting near the grip of his revolver. "They'll be comin'," he muttered. "Hank Malone doesn't let folks get away," Mary snorted. "Hank Malone don't scare me. Been swatting pests off my land for 20 years. Will cracked a smile, small, but real. "These pests bite harder." Sarah sat by the fire, watching the flames dance. Her fingers wrapped around the eagle feather necklace Tahoma had given her, a token heavy with honor. She remembered her aunt held in Redstone under Eli and Jack's control. Her heart squeezed tight. If she could help Tahoma escape, she could help her aunt, too. After what felt like half an hour, Mary tied off the last bandage. "He needs rest," she said, "and food. I'll get coffee on." Tahoma looked to Sarah. In his dark eyes, she saw gratitude and something else. A promise. "You fought like a warrior," he told her quietly. Sarah swallowed a lump of pride that felt too big for her small chest. "You taught me how," she whispered back. Will knelt beside them. There were gray hairs mixing into his beard, tiny reminders of long seasons spent working land that never gave enough. But tonight, hope not age filled his expression. "Sarah, you saved a man's life tonight. That's something to be proud of." She blinked fast to stop tears. "I just didn't want him to die." "That's what makes it brave," he said. Sarah leaned against him, exhausted. She felt safe for the first time in what seemed like days. Will brushed a hand over her tangled hair. "I failed your daddy once," he said softly, voice low so Mary wouldn't overhear. "But I won't fail you." Sarah looked up at him, searching, and found truth. Outside, the wind shifted. Hoofbeats echoed faintly across the plains, maybe a mile away, carried by the night air like a warning. Will stood slowly. Mary noticed immediately. "They're close?" "Too close." Tahoma tightened his jaw, forcing himself upright. Pain shadowed his face, but resolve burned stronger. "We should go." Mary shook her head and cocked a shotgun that had hung over the fireplace. "You're not going anywhere yet. You'll stay alive under my roof, or die fighting on it." Sarah gasped, her heart leaping into her throat, but Mary wasn't finished. "And if Hank Malone wants a war on my land," she pumped the shotgun once more. Click, then he'd best say his prayers. The room fell quiet, not from fear, but from the rise of hope sharper than steel. Because tonight, Sarah realized something important. They weren't running anymore. They were standing. Dawn broke slowly over Clearwater Springs, painting the Texas sky in streaks of dusty rose and pale gold. The chill of the night lingered around the small homestead, where Ruth Thompson stood on the porch, shotgun in hand, her boots planted firmly, as if rooted into the very soil. Inside, Samuel Dawson checked his revolver again, 5 bullets left. Tahoma tightened the last knot of leather holding his fresh bandage in place, hiding the deep wound running nearly 8 inches across his chest. His breath came rough, but his spirit held strong. Clara Dawson, hair wild and face still smudged with dirt and worry, climbed the ladder into the barn loft. From up there, she could see nearly a quarter mile across the plain. She clenched the bone-handled dagger Tahoma had gifted her, wishing she were bigger, older, faster, anything that would let her protect the people who had chosen to protect her. The first sign of danger came not from sight, but from sound. A distant rumble, hoofbeats. Dozens of them, like thunder rolling just under the earth. Will stepped outside, squinting toward the horizon. Dust rose in a thick cloud nearly half a mile away, advancing quick. He didn't need a spyglass to know who led that charge. "Malone's comin'," he muttered. Mary spat into the dirt. "Let him." Tahoma positioned himself beside the porch railing, rifle resting on his forearm. He glanced up at Sarah. "Watch the left side," he said. "They may try circling around the barn." She nodded. She would not run this time. She would stand. As the riders drew nearer 50 yards, then 40, the voice that rose from the pack froze the morning air like a gust from the Rockies. "Dawson," Hank Malone roared. "Hand over the Indian and the girl, and maybe the rest of you live long enough to see noon." Will didn't bother answering. Jack and his men halted about 30 feet from the house. A line of horses and guns. Eli sat beside his father, his hand wrapped in a fresh bandage, hatred etched into every inch of his young face. Jack lifted his rifle. Last chance. The quiet before the gunfire felt long enough to count every heartbeat. Sarah held her breath. Then Will fired first. The shot cracked through the valley, and one of Jack's hired gunmen tumbled off his saddle, hitting the ground with a heavy thud. Chows erupted. Bullets tore into the porch railing. Glass shattered. Mary fired her shotgun, the recoil shaking her shoulders but her stance never wavering, and another rider dropped. Tahoma squeezed the trigger of his rifle, striking a third man square in the shoulder, sending him spinning from his horse. His injury pulled, blood seeping again through the bandage, but he didn't flinch. Jack pointed upward. "Get that girl." 2 riders broke right, galloping toward the barn. Sarah saw them coming and ducked, heart pounding so loud she worried they'd hear it. When one rider dismounted and crept toward the barn door, she seized her moment. She threw her dagger. It wasn't a killing throw, she wasn't strong enough, but the blade stuck into the rider's thigh. He screamed, collapsing to one knee. Sarah scrambled down the loft ladder, grabbed his dropped pistol, and backed away before he could reach her. She was shaking, terrified, but she didn't drop the gun. The fight raged hard for several minutes, though fear stretched time into something much longer. For every outlaw who fell, another pushed forward. Hank Malone screamed orders fueled more by pride than strategy. Will ducked behind a wooden water barrel, firing his last 2 rounds. "We're running lean," he called. Mary tossed him a spare shell. "Make it count." At the porch's edge, Tahoma's rifle clicked empty. He dropped it without hesitation, lifted a piece of broken porch timber nearly 4 feet long, and braced himself for close combat. When Eli charged forward, Tahoma stepped into his path, swinging the timber like a club. Eli crashed into the dirt, his gun skittering out of reach. Sarah ran to Tahoma's side, pistol trembling in her grip. Eli looked up at her, eyes wide, shocked that a girl he once ordered around now held his fate in her hands. She didn't fire, but she didn't lower the gun either. "No more," she said with a voice steadier than she felt. Hank Malone saw his son down. Rage exploded inside him. He raised his rifle, aiming at Sarah, but Will, seeing the motion before anyone else, turned and tackled Sarah to the ground just as the shot fired. The bullet tore through Will's coat, narrowly missing flesh. Tahoma moved like a storm unleashed. With one final push of strength, he charged Jack, knocking him backward off his horse. The 2 men hit the dirt hard, the sheriff of the land and the man he wished to erase from it. The fight was brief. Tahoma pinned Jack, grabbing his rifle and hurling it aside. Jack glared up, panting, beaten, and saw something he didn't understand. "Mercy. You don't deserve to die by my hand," Tahoma said. "Living with your choices, that is punishment." Jack's roar became a choked cry. His men, seeing their leader down, began retreating, scattered like coyotes chased from a fresh kill. The battlefield quieted. Sarah looked at Tahoma, at Will, at Mary. She pressed the eagle feather necklace against her heart. They had survived together. And in that Texas sunrise, a truth settled into her bones. Family isn't just who you are born to. It's who stands beside you when the bullets fly. As we walk the later miles of our life's trail, stories like Sarah and Tahoma's remind us of truths we've known in our bones for decades, truths earned through hardship, resilience, and love. One of the most powerful lessons in their journey is that courage does not depend on size, age, or circumstance. A 10-year-old girl, small and frightened, chose to do the right thing even when the price could have been her own life. Many of us, especially those who have lived long enough to remember wars, grief, and uncertainty, understand that kind of courage, the quiet bravery of standing up for what matters most. Another message we carry from this tale is that hope often arrives unexpectedly, sometimes in the form of a stranger, a long-lost family member, or help from places we thought barren. Tahoma, who believed he would die alone, lived because a child believed his life was worth saving. And Will, a man who once felt he failed his family, discovered that redemption can ride in on the back of a second chance. Life has a way of mending fences we once thought broken for good. Most importantly, the story teaches us that family is not limited to blood. True family shows up when danger closes in. True family chooses to protect, to forgive, and to stand shoulder to shoulder when the bullets of hardship start flying. As we age, many of us discover that some relatives become strangers, while some strangers become the very people who guard our hearts. So may this story remind us, we are never too old to stand up for what is right. We are never too late to choose hope, and we are never, ever alone when we choose to stand together.